Hello, 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 and welcome to Behind the Screen. I am JM. This is a show where we just sit and we talk about games, we talk about game design, adventure planning, reviews of games, just basically everything that we want to talk about gaming. And today we're finishing up a tour of our look at the sword and sorcery genre. And so the first episode that we did, 2 episodes back, was what were the exemplaries, what were the high watershed examples of sword and sorcery. Then last time we looked at the mechanics and what games kind of best represent that genre. And today we're going to talk about how we can bring that experience to the table. First of all, let me say hello to John and Grom and Padre. Good to have you in the chat. As always, love chatting with you guys, love interacting with that. And yeah, let's just dive right into it. Oh, before I forget, Saturday morning at 10 a.m. Central, we're going to be going live with our next episode of Exploring Glorantha. We're actually breaking it up into 2 episodes. We're going to do Prax as the focus of this month's episode, and next month we're going to look at Pavis and Big Rubble, because there's just so much going on in Prax that we felt it was worthwhile taking a pause and kind of separating these 2 things out. So Evan and I will be there at 10 a.m. Central right here. You can join us for Exploring Glorantha. Professor, good to see you as always. So, how do we do this? I think the first thing that we do as GMs is we pull the scale back. It is so tempting for us to want to start all games with how we save the world, right? You put them on the track on day one, right? It's sort of the epic or the high fantasy idea, right? Rand knows that the Dark One is breaking free, even though he doesn't know he's the dragon. Frodo discovers he has to do something with this ring, although he doesn't know what that is. But in Sword and Sorcery, things need to be tighter, they need to be closer, they need to be more personal. Ian, good to see you this morning, bud. So Ian brought up last time Thieves World. Thieves World's a good example for this. Very rarely do the actions save the world. Maybe they save the city, but in more likelihood, they kind of affect a small local group of people. So pull the scope back. Also, let's look at, they're more episodic, the stories are, so I would say bringing in more encapsulated stories is another way we can do this. Self-contained. Reoccurring NPCs, yes, but not the lingering plots that we tend to enjoy in our D20 fantasy or in our epic fantasy. Where, if we're getting into the Malazan Books of the Fallen, actually, Malazan does a very interesting thing. While there is an overarching thread through the whole 10-book series, for a long time, each book's story is very self-contained. You can almost pick any of the first 6 books up and read them with a little bit of confusion, kind of independently. So more episodic, more local, more personal, and more mercenary. What do I mean by that? So often we set the hook up as these evil things are doing evil things, so go take care of them. Sword and Sorcery, we need to appeal to the players and the characters' greed. You want this nice thing, I'll give you this nice thing if you do this thing for me. Oh, Rook, thank you as always for your generosity, and thank you to our new subscribers. I love seeing that little thing come on beneath the, or on the screen. So, fetch quests, possibly, Professor. We see that a lot in Lankmar, in Thieves World, in Conan, right? Conan breaks into the Tower of the Elephant to get this bauble. Yes, and Padre brings up a good point that is on my notes here, but I'm just going to jump ahead. Yes, it is a great genre for groups that have trouble getting everyone together. If you can keep the adventure to a single contained night, then it doesn't matter who shows up. That's the crew that gets together to go out and do the thing. Again, Lies of Locke Lamora, the Gentleman Bastard series, has a lot of Sword and Sorcery-esque connections, right? You have this... it's a heist game, right? The first book is a heist book. Now, granted, that would be a heist that needs to take place over a long period of time. But if you can come up with a 4 or 6 hour, hey, we're going to sit down, we're going to play this adventure, and we're done, that works out really well for whatever people need, just, one shots, or as Richard talks about with the Grand Campaign, when you have some downtime in your game, This is a perfect way to dovetail new people in. The other thing is with Sword and Sorcery genre, yes, a bit like world-connected one-shots. Exactly. And the thing about that, John, good point. Have a Benny. The thing about a series of interconnected one-shots is that the world sort of accretes around it. And that's great. That is a very old school style of world building. The threads that get drawn aren't plot threads. They're relationship threads. I'm going to use a Thieves' Worldism. One thumb. We keep going back to one thumb to get advice. Tempest keeps showing up, and sometimes we align with him and sometimes we don't. We'll go over to Conan, right? Are we sailing with Belit this week, or do we need to go off and do something else in a port that she dropped us off at? Now, you might want to say, hey, it's a lot to set up an adventure, right? A one-shot adventure, especially a series of interconnected ones. Well, here's the thing to remember. Most often, Sword and Sorcery stories start in the middle of the action. Start in Media Res. All right, you guys have accepted this job. You have gone off. You start off with a bang. Someone kicks in the door. Roll for initiative. Everyone make a climb check, or you fall to your death. Those are ways to start off a great Sword and Sorcery adventure, right? Have the NPC have an NPC falling because they failed their climb check as the group is scaling a set of bluffs to get to the top of the cliff for some reason. That grabs the player's attention. It gets everyone focused. We start right off. There was during the time of the Forge, which was a kind of a indie role-playing hub back in the late 90s, early 2000s, if I remember correctly, maybe mid 2000s. They referred to this as a bang. What is the explosive moment of excitement that you can start your setting with or your session with that immediately grabs everyone's attention? Yes, Rook, that's a great one. Meanwhile, you do this. Meanwhile, you do that. Right, it circumvents kind of the stereotypical tropes of you're in a tavern, you're in an inn, you've been arrested. What do you do now? There is no question of what do you do now if you're hanging by your fingertips off the edge of a cliff, or if you are rolling for initiative. Everything gets the players into that groove and just goes forward. Oh yeah, I have a lot of games. Sorcerer was the one I really liked. Another Sword and Sorcery game. So, one other thing that you can do with this, and this kind of leans into our idea of Media Res and Meanwhiles, I like that term, Rook, is the idea of flashback sessions and flash forward sessions. In a Sword and Sorcery game, there is nothing to say that the adventures have to be linear. There's nothing that says, oh, well, we did this thing, so now we're doing this thing. Maybe you could say, hey, everybody, give me your character sheets. All right, I've made copies of them. Sweet. Now, this week, everyone take, if you're playing Savage Worlds, 8 advancements, and we're going to tell a story much later in the character's arc. Or, everybody re-roll first level, level characters. Second edition D&D used to have this page on the character sheet where you could say what you got at each level, because level drain was a real thing and you had to know how to backtrack your character. I love that idea. Another way to do this, if you're not comfortable with that, if your group's like, hey, we want to tell a more linear story, which is fine, you've got to keep the players hungry. So how do you do that? I have used this to great effect. Give everybody the ability to spend some of their money, but then do a montage, and I'll explain what I mean by that. Talk about a montage. Obviously, the best montage is from Rocky, and then after that is the Team America World Police meta montage that they do. Don't necessarily recommend that movie, but it's a good meta montage. Ask everybody how they lost the rest of their money. Did you blow it on carousing? Did you try to set up a venture? Maybe it succeeded, maybe it failed. Give the players control of how their players are in need of money. Ask the question, why does your character need money right now? What went wrong after their last payday? It's a 13th ageism that they use for travel that I just adore. I use it for much more than travel now. Ask your players, why are they hungry? Why are they taking this next job? It allows the players to come up with creative ways that their players have failed off screen and now need to succeed on screen. It's a good way to engage the player, and it doesn't feel like the player, you're dropping the GM hammer of, well, and you lost all your money. On to the next adventure. That's not a great motivator. Your player gets to say, well, I sent all my money back to the Shire because, you know, rock plague has broke out and now I'm broke and my family needs more medicine. Suddenly they've come up with a cool reason. You now have something called rock plague in your event, in your campaign setting, and they are as hungry as their character is for the next adventure. Yes, a montage and breaking the fourth wall within it. Exactly. And it's excellent, Professor. I love that. Enjoy that story prompt. These are all free. So the last thing that I think really kind of cements the Sword and Sorcery experience is when we take the focus away from the monsters in the world. What do I mean by that? We talked about a lot in Epic and High Fantasy the role of monsters in the world. Sword and Sorcery, 90% of your foes should be humans. They should have human reactions too. Not everyone's going to fight to the deaths. People run away. Deaths should feel humanized in the fact that you're not just cutting down faceless hordes of undead, but you're cutting down bandits and people that you've have allied with in previous adventures and friends of friends who are opposed to you. Maybe you can get your players to negotiate a little bit more often. But again, 90% of the people should be human because that's what we see in the genre, right? We see most of the foes that Loch Lamora fights, that Fafhrd Greymouser, that JD the Red, Conan, obviously, why am I stumbling over that one? Fight are human. And what this does is it grounds the game in a more understandable and relatable setting, right? One of the reasons that we love Hyperborea is because if you squint and kind of look at the edge of the map, you feel like you're in another time and place on Earth. Sword and Sorcery has a very Earth-like feel to it. So if you're pushing that forward, you get that genre emulation is really coming through. But on the flip side, when you use monsters, make them as scary and terrifying and eldritch horror-y as possible. You don't want a monster. You don't want giant spiders. You want Shelob. And you want it to be placed at the most perfect point in the story and have the rest of the story sort of built around gluttony and corruption. Because again, right, here we go. Shelob is this bloated thing that eats and consumes, this spawn of Ungoliant who eventually consumed herself out of lack of anything else to eat. So that's kind of like monsters in Sword and Sorcery tend to be more set pieces than they do to be individual encounters. And again, think of what else is going around and pick a monster that is suitable to the rest of the story. If the story's about greed, bring in a genie. Bring in... if the story's about despair or trying to save someone, nothing works better than a Medusa, right? Being turned to stone is symbolically kind of the equivalent of despair. And so you want something that is big, it's large, it's scary, or you want to skew the other way into hordes of faceless monsters that threaten to overwhelm the heroes. Humans tend to fight one-on-one, one-on-two. Monsters should either be hordes or an individual creature. A creature of such terrifying and cosmic horror that it causes even the most stalwart warrior to pause and take notice. All right, let me take a look at our chat here. You guys are on a roll today. I'm trying to stay focused on these, Rook. We're in the swing of this kind of cadence of how we're talking about these genres. Oh no, the internet is glitchy today, Padre. Sorry to hear that. Phantom, you are right. That was a selling point of Talaslanta, that there was no elves in that. The Medusa, the ancient drug dealer who is always getting people stoned. Well done, John. So, that is our look at the Sword and Sorcery experience. Oh, no, there's one more thing. Haha, right here on my notes, even had it underlined. Breach Hall Uldai, even had it underlined. If you can figure out what movie that is from or know it off the top of your head, you will definitely get a no prize. So, the last thing we need to focus on is magic as corruptive. Now, some games have a built-in corruption mechanic. DCC is another, Dungeon Crawl Classics is another wonderful D20 game that feels Sword and Sorcery. They have this whole litany at the start of the book that you're no hero, you're a reaver, you're a sellsword, you're a mercenary. Magic is very corruptive. If you're playing a wizard, they actually have like a corruption progression chart. As you get more powerful, the less human you look. So, how do we reinforce that? Well, some games have the mechanics for it. Most of the games I talked about on Tuesday have mechanics for magical corruption. On the flip side, if your game doesn't, that doesn't mean that you can't induce this. Simple rules like you get a corruption point equal to half the level of the spell casting, and then you set little thresholds. The other thing is always be willing to make deals with players for power. That is a key component of Sword and Sorcery and a great way to emulate corruption. We had a player in my Tor game 2 weeks ago who called out to whatever entity would listen to him to help him save his group, and now he has cybernetic horns that have erupted out of his head, and none of his magic seems to work the way it did. His faith magic seems to have something glitchy going on. We want magic to feel not mysterious as it is in epic fantasy or pervasive as it feels in high fantasy. We want it to feel secretive. We want it to actually be occult in the actual root of that word, hidden, right? We want it to be mysterious. We want it to be seductive, right? Faust doesn't make the deal with Mephistopheles because it seems like a good idea. He is seduced into it by Mephistopheles. And that is the way to look at magic in this game. You need to make magic seem better than it actually is. It needs to have a cost usually in blood, whether that is your own, a sacrifice, someone you love, a large populace. That is how magic works in Sword and Sorcery. And if your players are willing to pay that price, then maybe they need to become NPCs. I'm just saying. So that brings us to the end of Sword and Sorcery. We've gone through a lot of fantasy genres on this channel. We've done epic, high, and Sword and Sorcery. And we've got 2 left to cover. The next one we're going to cover is Grim Dark. It's going to be a ride. It's a genre I really love, but we're going to start that next Thursday. On Tuesday, I'm planning on doing a look at the Eternal Night of Lockwood, a campaign for Zweihander, which just so happens to be one of the games that I plan on using as an exemplar of our grimdark setting. So, we're going to look at an essay from R. Scott Baker. We're going to talk about the exemplaries on Thursday of next week, and then we're going to do a game review on Tuesday. So, if you're a member of the Iconic Patronage and you're on the Discord, look for it today or tomorrow for the list of authors that sort of embody grimdark. Just to kind of give you a preview, I would say Martin is sort of dipping his toes into grimdark, but the 3 main exemplars that I love are Joe Abercrombie with The First Law, The Age of Madness, Heroes, Red Country, Sharp Ends, and what's the other one? What's the heist story? I'll put it in the list. Anna Smith Sparks, if you haven't read her Empires of Dust series is beautiful. It verges on the poetic, like her prose verges on the poetic quite a bit. And then R. Scott Baker, the Second Apocalypse series. We're going to talk about that. Now, here's the thing, and I'll give this preface again on Thursday. Grimdark is a dark setting and genre to look at. But again, going back to our Medusa discussion, it allows us to look at the darkness in our world through a mirror, much like Perseus. We don't have to look the Medusa in the face. We can see its reflection, and hopefully the reflection protects us while we look at these things. So we're going to talk about Grimdark next week. It'll be a 3-episode arc, but we're going to come back with The Eternal Night of Lockwood on Tuesday. And then again, if you are at all interested, our Exploring Glorantha show, where Evan and I just, does what it says on the tin. Explore Glorantha will be on Saturday morning at 10 a.m. We're going to be looking at Prax, which is a Sword and Sorcery-esque area in Glorantha. So, that's what we have iconic this week. Next week we have Deadlands, episode 10. We've got the new arc of Torg Eternity. We've got Behind the Screens, and then not this Sunday, but next Sunday, we will be talking with Rob about 13th Age 2nd Edition, and I'm very excited. Yes, Black Company is grimdark. Although, man, Black Company, I could do a whole just series on the Black Company. Man, I love those books. That is actually how I got into Malazan, because somebody on the Black Company discussions recommended Gardens of the Moon. So we will cover the difference between grimdark and gritty next week, Ian, and really what pushes it beyond gritty fantasy into the true grim darkness. And then we'll cover cross worlds fantasy, and then then we'll start a whole new series as you requested. We're gonna look at sci-fi. We're gonna look at science fantasy, space opera, hard sci-fi, and a couple of other ones to take a look at. Cyberpunk, near future, that kind of thing. But that brings us to the end of this episode of Behind the Screens. Thank you to everyone who has shown up in the chat. John, Ian, Phantom, Professor, Grom, Rook, and Padre. So we're going to talk about, I'll see you all in a week for more Behind the Screens on Tuesday. Until then, stay safe, stay healthy, stay gaming, and we will see you all on Tuesday. Have a good one.